What is going on, everybody? It is the Icebreaker here, back with another video. For today's video, we are continuing our short series here of previewing every team in the NHL. This week's video, we are previewing the Central Division, and we're going to be ranking my divisional standings, giving you guys my predictions, best team to worst team, or worst team to best team. You guys know the drill by now. Last week we did the Pacific, Metro, and Atlantic are coming up in the weeks to follow. But for this video, we're obviously focusing specifically on the Central Division and the 8 teams that compile that division. Right now, before I get into the video, I don't know if this is really my place to do it. It's kind of it's very difficult topic to talk about, but obviously, like, I felt like I'd be remiss if I didn't at least acknowledge the events that happened a few days ago with Johnny Gaudreau and his brother Matthew passing away. Just being on their bikes and an alleged drunk driver striking them down. I mean, it's a huge loss. Obviously, Gaudreau is a member of the Blue Jackets, but more importantly, these are two young men who are in the prime of their lives and just, fantastic human beings. We know that Johnny, for example, has been, involved in the community in both with the Calgary organization and obviously a huge part of that Blue Jackets franchise. I just want to give out my condolences to the Gaudreau family. I know, like, I'm just a small YouTuber. I'm a stranger or an outsider, if you will, but I felt like I had to address it. Just everything about that situation is just heartbreaking. The circumstances, the fact that they were in town for their sister's wedding that was literally happening the following day. Just from the fact that it was like a preventable death for these two men. I mean, again, the drunk driver who decided to get behind the wheel, made a stupid mistake, and it changed the lives of, kill two people, but change the lives of many in their families that are going to be heavily affected by this. So yeah, it's just everything about this situation is just incredibly heartbreaking. And yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge it. I wanted to address it real quickly because I felt weird about like doing a video without at least kind of just sending out my thoughts and prayers to the family. And yeah, there's not much else I can do. I hope that the family can heal, find it in them to heal, with time. And yeah, that's all I can really say about it. So let's move on. Let's get into the video. So kicking things off, coming in last in the Central Division, this is not a shocker by any means. Once again, I got the Chicago Blackhawks with a 28-45-9 record for 65 points. Look, they did a lot in the offseason. It seems like they're going to be a lot better than they were last year, but I look at the rest of the division. I can't make the case for the Blackhawks being better than any of those other 7 teams. So I think by default, they unfortunately fall as the worst team in this division. But look, it goes without saying, this was a 52-point team last season, and given the talent that they added in the offseason to properly surround Connor Bedard a little bit, give him some offensive support, because when Bedard went down with injury, the team just was completely lost. They virtually had no offense to give. Bedard really is the driving force of that Blackhawks forward group, and just with the moves they made, it definitely seems like they're going to be significantly better, at least up front. And they added some veteran pieces on the blue line. Like, it seems like overall they definitely made necessary pieces to improve the team. So looking at their forward group here, it's clearly a lot better than it was last season. You look at Connor Bedard going into his second season. He is the franchise of this Chicago Blackhawks team. 61 points in just 68 games last year. We know he has that elite franchise potential. I think as soon as next year, he could be north of a point per game. Very likely he could hit 90 plus points. It wouldn't surprise me that much, just given his ceiling in the NHL. He has the potential to be at the very least a top 5 player in the league. But with the additions they got here, they bring in Tyler Bertuzzi and Teuvo Teravainen, each of which can give you about 20-25 goals, somewhere in the 50 to 60 point range is my guess, especially if they're going to be on the wings of Connor Bedard, who's just a fantastic playmaker and a great goal scorer in his own right. I mean, he was like a 70 goal scorer in his draft year, right, with the WHL. So if that projects to be their top line, I think they're looking really solid. They're certainly back in business compared to, previous seasons. They just haven't had enough offensive talent. Taylor Hall's a huge key here coming back into their top 6. He only played 10 games last season. But yeah, he's a huge wild card because we don't know what kind of Taylor Hall we're going to get. Are we going to get MVP Taylor Hall like with New Jersey, or just a mediocre Taylor Hall in his last year in Boston wasn't fairly productive, at least in the regular season? Or are we going to get a solid top 6 option who's capable of giving you about 50 to 60 points? So hopefully that's kind of where he lies. Now he's coming back from injury. You never really know how guys are going to produce, especially for a guy who's well in his 30s now. It's a little bit difficult to predict that. But I think Taylor Hall, with an improved talent around him, if maybe he is the guy that plays with Bedard, his production will come up, will be a huge boost to that Blackhawks top six, obviously. But yeah, the rest of the four groups not so bad. I don't mind the depth that they have. I know Ilya Mikheyev was a bit of a cap dump from Vancouver, but I do think he has some offense to give when he's healthy. He is capable of giving you, 15 to 20 goals in a third line role. I think it's absolutely perfect for him. Lucas Reichel's another guy who's still very young and not coming off the greatest season. So that's probably why he's projected on the fourth line. But I definitely think that he's more of a top six talent, or at the very least a middle six talent in the NHL, if he can just realize some of that potential, that raw potential that's still there. Khrushchev's coming off a very underrated season. I could see him being roughly in the 60-point range, 50 to 60-point range as well. Just a good top 6-4. I think he proved that last season that he is capable of being a very productive forward. As for the defense, however, just like all those other young teams in the league, this is definitely a work in progress. I do like the depth additions, adding albeit older guys, veteran guys in Alec Martinez and TJ Brody. It's fine, but the rest of the defense still needs some work. Vlasic is still very young and needs to come to his own. Kevin Korchinski had a very rough rookie season, although he has that offensive potential. Defensively, he wasn't great at all, and he needs to develop a little bit more. Maybe another season under his belt will give him that opportunity to just, be a little bit better than he was in his rookie year. Obviously, he's going to develop. He's going to get better. He's a high draft pick. I'm not too worried at this point. And then you have Seth Jones, awful contract, but he can still be serviceable offensive guy. He's capable of giving you about 40 points on a good year. So, and then in goal, you got Peter Mrazek still there. He's honestly not bad. He's coming off a pretty decent season, all things considered. And Laurent Brossoit from the Winnipeg Jets, who was arguably one of, if not the best backups in the league last season. I think he has some injury troubles. He might not be available to start the year. I think he was out. I think they said he was out for like 4 to 7 weeks or something like that. But I think he could maybe take the reins as the starter. I definitely think, given how good he has been in a backup role for, several years now, he's very consistent, a solid backup. So he'll probably be more in a tandem with Mrazek. Maybe he can take the reins as the starter when he's healthy. Goaltending looks to be better. I think overall the Blackhawks are addressing a solid team, or not a solid team. I don't think in comparison to the rest of the league, it's a great offensive team, and obviously defense and the goaltending could use a little bit of work, but again, it's going to be better than last season though. Overall, they're still not anywhere close to making the playoff spot, especially in the Central Division that is quickly improving. The Hawks are not a team that I'm expecting to really make any sort of significant noise. So that's why I kind of have them around the 65-point range. I think there is a world where maybe they can push for 70 to 75, kind of like the Anaheim Ducks that I alluded to in the Pacific Division video. But just with the talent they have, they're definitely in line to being significantly better, but not to the point where they're anywhere close to a playoff spot. Again, Bedard would have to be like an MVP caliber player. Blue line would have to exceed expectations. Goaltending would have to be fantastic for this team to be anywhere close to a playoff spot or even make the playoffs. But I don't see that happening. And as a result, I think they are 8th in the Central. Next up, coming in at 7th in the Central Division, and this is really tough. The rest of these teams, I think there's arguments to be made that you can put them in different positions. Blues fans, I know you're not going to like this. I know there's a lot of Blues fans that get really defensive for their team, and they're going to say, oh, this is absolutely disrespectful. But I'm sorry. I got the Blues in 7th, 38, 36, and 8 for 84 points. I don't have them having a terrible season. I could see a world where they can take a small step back and regress slightly in this division. So yes, as an 84-point team, this is not a bad hockey team. I'm not saying the Blues are going to be shit next year. Like, they were nearly made the playoffs. They had 92 points. You can make the argument that they improved a little bit overall with their roster. For me, I just like some of the other teams in the Central a little bit better. Like I mentioned here, there's still concerns with the blue line. I still think it's among one of the worst blue lines in the NHL. And, goaltending was fantastic last year, but to expect Binnington and Hofer to replicate the seasons they had, I think it's a tall order. So starting off with their forward group, I'll be honest, I actually kind of like the additions they made. You could make the argument that they got a lot deeper. And one of their kind of struggles last season, because of how great their goaltending was, they didn't really get enough offensive support, because obviously You have Robert Thomas, who had a fantastic season last year, and I think he's a point per game center in the league officially. He's obviously their best player, their number one center. Kyrie's very solid. Buchnevich, although had a bit of a slight dip in his production comparison to his first 2 years where he was north of a point per game when he was healthy. But, I still expect him to be hovering around the 70 to 80 point range. He's a fantastic player, and he's really broken out since coming to St. Louis. But after that, I actually really like the Matthew Joseph addition. I think Dylan Holloway snagging him from the Oilers, there's still some untapped potential there. He's so super, super young. And Alexander Texier had flashes, showed flashes in Columbus that he could be a really solid, 15 to 20 goal scorer. I wouldn't put it past him if he does have one of his a breakout season, let's say. But yeah, overall, this is honestly not the worst forward group I've seen. I think the Blues are definitely going to be much better, at least offensively, I would say. Brandon Saad is still very solid. A guy had 25 plus goals this year, if I'm not mistaken. Braden Shen was somewhat of a disappointment, but I could see him bouncing back and getting to at least 50 points. I find it interesting that they have Buchnevich centering the second line, but I know that they have tried him at center at times over, the last year, and I think he'll work out fine there. Something that I would try maybe is, to improve that center depth, although I like Radek Faksa. Maybe move down Shen, centering his own line on that third line and giving someone like Joseph or Holloway a top six opportunity and really see what if there's still some potential there for them to break out and just deliver more offense than they have over the course of their careers thus far. But overall, I really think this is a solid forward group, and if anyone was to give me an argument as to why the Blues could actually surprise people and make the playoffs, this would be a very strong argument, just given that their offensive depth looks significantly better than it was. But then we get to their defense. Still not a huge fan of it. I know they added Ryan Suter, who's more of a depth guy at this stage of his career. On the third pair, I think he'll be fine there. Torrey Krug not being there for the entire season, or at least projects to not be there for the entire season. That's a massive blow. Although he's not great defensively, you know that he is going to be their leading point getter on their power play, to provide offense for that blue line, obviously. So you look at a guy, Falk has had a pretty productive offensive years in the past, so I think maybe this is an opportunity for him to step once again. Or a younger guy like Scott Perunovich, who has that offensive ceiling that could be somebody that maybe has a bit of a breakout season. I'm guessing that's what Blues fans are hoping for. But the huge wild card here is their new addition in Philip Broberg, who was really coming on towards the end of the Stanley Cup playoffs with the Oilers, especially in the finals. He was probably playing some of his best hockey of his entire career. So I think the Blues saw that and they're like, you know what? We need some help on defense. Let's offer sheet him. Give him a price that Edmonton, quite frankly, could not afford. And now the Blues have him on their roster, and he definitely should project to be a top four defenseman there. Is he a top four defenseman? That remains to be seen. But if he can have that amazing breakout season and bring some more stability, some more two-way play, the Blues will be in much better position defensively. But still a young guy. You just don't know how he'll fit with a new team. He hopes he takes that step forward, but you never know. But yeah, I still have my concerns with the blue line. But again, that's another area of their team that could be a lot better than people think, I guess. But now let's talk about their goaltending, right? Jordan Binnington and Joel Hofer had fantastic seasons last year. I'm going to give them their flowers. They were one of the better goaltending tandems in the entire NHL. I think that's a fact. Let's be honest, right? Now, with goaltending, it's just so tough to predict year in and year out how they can perform. And unless you're like the elite of elite goalies, and let's be honest, Jordan Binnington is not that. Let's just call a spade a spade. I know he won a cup in his rookie year, but throughout the majority of his career, very inconsistent. You can blame the bad defense in front of him for that, but he hasn't necessarily done the Blues any favors for the majority of his career in St. Louis, right? Now, coming off a great season, I just think the season was so good. It's not a hot take to assume that you could envision some regression from this goaltending, right? I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility whatsoever. And if he goes back to what he has been over the course of his career, just being more inconsistent and not providing consistent, sustainable, solid goaltending game in and game out, I think if the goaltending does dip a little bit, that should very much hurt the Blues' chances of making the playoffs this next season. So Blues fans, before you go absolutely ballistic on me, I don't fucking hate the Blues, all right? I think this is a very decent hockey team. I don't think this is a contender. It's not like too outlandish to assume that this team wouldn't make the playoffs even. I don't think like people should be upset about that, but to have them in seventh, I can understand why people are like, oh, you're totally disrespecting them. And I know a lot of people, a lot of YouTube hockey content creators are disrespecting the Blues. And look, I don't like that I'm putting them down here, but I like the ceilings of the other teams I have ahead of them a little bit better than the Blues. But look, this is a solid team. They're going to be competitive every single game. I just have concerns about certain players, and ultimately, I just think they're going to regress a little bit, and that's why I have them in seventh. Sorry. So getting into number 6 in the Central Division, a team that I think is going to be significantly better than it has been when it was formerly the Arizona Coyotes, the new, well, quote unquote, new franchise, the Utah Hockey Club. I have them having sort of a bit of a breakout season and having, a legitimate chance of maybe sneaking into the playoffs. We'll see. 44, 34, and 8 for 88 points. Although I don't have them making the playoffs, I think there is a legitimate possibility that they could make a push. One thing that we know that Utah is able to do is score goals. I believe they ranked right around the top half of the league last season in offense. And just given where this team is and the players that they have in their lineup, I don't expect that to regress at all. I just really think that's a very young, energized team, and I think they're going to score quite a bit of goals this season. Do I think they're an elite offense? No, but I think they're still solid enough where they can, keep themselves afloat and in a lot more games. But the big reason why this team should drastically improve is the improvements they made on the blue line. I think they look a lot better, a lot more complete, competent team than they have been at any point that they were with the Arizona Coyotes, especially these last 5-6 years where they basically haven't been relevant at all. I think this season they are most definitely going to be a relevant team. So looking at their forward group, overall pretty solid, but how it's constructed, it's basically the complete opposite of the Vegas Golden Knights. The Vegas Golden Knights, like we mentioned, great center depth. Wing depth is a little bit shaky. With Utah, it's the complete opposite. I think their wing depth is absolutely fantastic. Clayton Keller, superstar player as far as I'm concerned. Schmaltz, if he's healthy, fantastic top liner. Gunther is going to break out next season, and he gave them some really solid production. I think he's going to have a really solid career as a top 6 forward in the league. Lawson Krause, 20-goal scorer. Matias Maccelli, underrated player, one of the more underrated players in the league. Playing on your third line is absolutely fantastic. And Josh Doan, in his small sample size, looked like he's going to have a really solid NHL career. Don't know what his ceiling is. If he is a third liner, maybe he is more of a top 6 guy. We'll see how he develops. But overall, the wing depth is absolutely fantastic. Center depth is a little bit more questionable, and that's kind of where I have pause when it comes to the Utah Hockey Club. And a big reason why I don't think they're quite ready to make the playoffs is if they don't have a true, legitimate number 1 center. The center position, in my opinion, is the most valuable, the most important of any position in the NHL. And unless you have that number one centerman, that stud guy, it's really hard to win, really hard to get your team to that next level. Now, having said that, Logan Cooley, it could be him. He definitely has that potential. I mean, coming off a really respectable 20-goal, 44-point rookie season. If he takes his game to the next level, I do think he could be around 60 points this year anyway. But if he can, be even better and elevate his play and as a second year, as a sophomore player, doesn't have that sophomore slump that everyone seems to have. If he can really cement himself as a true number 1 center as soon as this season, be 70-plus point guy, that greatly improves the Utah Hockey Club's chances of making the playoffs. But as of right now, I'm still not quite there yet. With their center depth, Barrett Hayton has had his struggles. At this point, it doesn't seem like he really fits as the team's number 1 center. But we'll see if he can get that chemistry back, bounces back. Maybe he can get himself back into the conversations like, okay, this guy could at the very least be a legit top 6 player. But ultimately, what puts this team in the playoff conversation for this season is the improvements they made on defense. Already kind of like their top 4. Well, I didn't like their top 4 before this offseason, but I like Sean Durzi. I think he's a really solid top 4 guy. Yusuf Alamaki really breaking out with a much bigger role with Utah, or I guess Arizona, coming from Calgary. I think he was a waiver claim, actually. So honestly, looking like a really solid steal there. But the 2 huge additions, trading for Mikhail Sergachev and John Marino, fantastic value, fantastic trades for them. Sergachev coming off an injury-riddled year, but we know he's capable of being a true number one defenseman, and I think there's going to be some pressure on him to be that in Utah, but I think he has the tool set to be just a solid two-way presence and a great offensive guy too. I mean, at Tampa Bay, a couple years back, he had his best season. I think he had well over 60 points, if I'm not mistaken. He was absolutely fantastic for them, and I think he can give them similar production, just given that the roster in Utah, the forward group, very solid, a lot of great offensive pieces, and John Marino is just a great two-way presence, one of the more underrated defensemen in the league, and he's going to give them more stability, and just Utah's defense looks a lot better, and I think they're a lot more complete than they were in years past, and that's a big reason why Utah is definitely looking to be a much more relevant and competitive team this season. As for the goaltending, still not entirely sold with it, although Connor Ingram's coming off a really solid season. Karel Vidmalka kind of struggled a little bit, although he's had years in the past where he's played really solid. So I think the goaltending could get by. If those guys give them like average goaltending, I think they'll still be in good shape to at least be in the wild card hunt. But I don't see anyone taking over as being like a true starting caliber guy. But if they rock with the tandem and they give them like 9-10-ish save percentage, which I think it's possible. I think they're both capable of giving them at the very least average caliber goaltending. Utah will be in a fine spot. Like considering how bad last season went, I don't think there should be too high of expectations to expect Utah to make a huge jump and make the playoffs in the Western Conference. But I definitely think the roster overall is very, very solid. And I think it's good enough to, at the very least, be in that discussion. But despite all that, I still think there's quite a bit that has to go right for this team to ultimately take that step into the playoffs. But like I said, looking much better than they have been in years past. They definitely should be, at the very least, a playoff hopeful, just given the roster that they have. Great offense, improved defense, goaltending is still decent enough. But yeah, hopefully they don't suffer another midseason plummet like they did. I think they went on like a 13 or 14 game losing streak. That really killed their playoff chances. But like before that happened, early on in the season, they were kind of hovering around the playoff line. So if they're just more consistent, I think they'll put themselves in that position to at least be in the conversation. But ultimately, I still have them missing the playoffs by about 5 points, I believe. So that's why I got them 6th in the Central. Next, 5th in the Central Division. Now, this too might shock some people, but I'm going with the Winnipeg Jets. I think they're going to regress quite a bit this season. I think they had 110 points last year. I just think they're definitely in a position to take a pretty massive step back. I got them with the 42-31-9 record for 93 points. I think they're in the playoff hunt. They'll be in the hunt for the wild card. But here's my hot take. Ultimately, I do have them just barely missing the playoffs. I know that's not going to go well for Winnipeg Jets fan. Another team that gets wildly disrespected, especially on this channel. I tend to like kind of take them out, or when I put them in, they always do bad. But when I put them out, they always do fantastic. So you know what? Take that as a compliment, Jets fans. Maybe they'll be freaking top 2 in the division again. It wouldn't surprise me because I think their roster overall is really solid. But yeah, I think there's definitely some merit to assume that this team's definitely going to regress a little bit now to the point where they miss the playoffs entirely. A bit of a hot take, but I'll get into my reasoning. Now, don't get me wrong. I think the Jets are still a very solid hockey team. I'm going to have them with 93 points, which is they're hovering around the playoff line. They'll probably be in a playoff position in parts of the season, of course. Maybe for a huge stretch, they'll be roughly hovering around the playoffs. So I'm not going off this incredibly unrealistic tangent saying that they're going to be a shit hockey team, because obviously I don't have them that low in the standings, but ultimately I do think that there are some reasons why they could fall back, because overall the roster I think is pretty solid, but for me it comes down to their coaching. Like with Rick Bowness no longer being a part of the team, I wonder if they lose a little bit of a defensive identity, a team that's never really been known for being great defensively, but Rick Bowness was a big part in improving that overall Jets team and just being more defensively responsible. And I think that could maybe take a toll with him no longer being a part of the organization, with him deciding to call it quits from coaching. And I think that could ultimately affect Connor Hellebuck, who had a Vezina season. Obviously, he won the Vezina last year. But Hellebuck, from year to year, although overall is a great goaltender, you can argue he's top 3 or argue he's the best in the league right now, obviously winning the Vezina. But he's had moments from year to year where he hasn't been very consistent, and he's not always somebody that I can like confidently say that he's a guy you can rely on every single year to be a Vezina caliber guy. And if his play struggles even slightly more than it did last season, that puts the Jets in jeopardy to definitely miss the playoffs, in my opinion. Because when I look at their forward group, I think it's really solid all around, but I don't think it's elite enough to the point where it can single-handedly carry this Jets team every single night. They don't have like super high-end talent, although guys like Mark Scheifele and Kyle Connor are near, right around point per game players and are definitely like all-star caliber guys, but they're not on the same levels as a Nathan McKinnon or an Austin Matthews or Kirill Kaprizov, guys like that who are just like the elite of elite, the highest class of the NHL, but they're definitely like really solid, not solid. They're great players. They're great players, let's be honest. But yeah, still, the forward group, though, I have no issues with it. I think they're going to score a fair amount of goals. I know losing Monahan and Toffoli in the offseason definitely hurts their depth a little bit. I don't like Vladislav Nemestikov as their number 2 center. That's a little bit concerning. But overall, Nikolai Ehlers, you can book it. He's probably a 55, 60, 65-point guy. Can hover around 30 goals. He's a really underrated player. We'll see if he has a long-term future with the Jets. I really hope for their sake he re-signs because he is definitely a big part of their offense. Cole Perfetti, huge year he needs to have this season. He's a huge X factor. Didn't really get a lot of playing time. Wasn't utilized much, especially down the stretch. But with this new opportunity, more players are gone. He's going to have that top 6 opportunity officially, and he should definitely really take that grasp and fully cement himself as a top 6 forward and be a 20-goal, 60-point guy. Hopefully he has that amazing breakout season. And I love Gabriel Velarde on that top line. He really fit in like a glove since coming over from the Kings. He has 30-plus goal potential, in my opinion, when healthy. He obviously played really well with Scheifele and Kyle Connor on that top line, so I think he fits perfectly on that number 1 top line and on the power play as well. Really think he's an underrated addition, and obviously they won the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade considering how it did not work out for PLD in LA, and the value that the Jets got back in return looks freaking solid. And then you look at their third line, you could argue it's probably the best third line in the league. I really love Adam Lowry's game. Niederreiter, underrated. Mason Appleton's very solid too. Bottom 6, not so bad either. Alex Iafallo on the fourth line is really good value because I really see him more as a third line guy, but on the fourth line, just how amazing their depth is, especially if a guy like Perfetti does take that next step. Forward group's looking solid. For me, that's not the issue. But again, this is becoming a theme for a lot of these Central Division teams I'm realizing now, is their defense. The Jets defense, to me, took some steps back. They lost Brendan Dillon. They lost Nate Schmidt as well. Look, Morrissey's still fantastic. He had one of his more complete seasons, even though offensively he took a very minimal step back in comparison to what he did the year before, where he had like north of 70 points. He was absolutely fantastic. But yeah, especially with Bonus gone, I definitely think the defensive structure, there's a little bit of question marks there, and I don't know how the defense is going to play. I still don't like this team defensively too much. But again, I like Morrissey and DeMello is a fine top pair. After that, Dylan Sandberg is a huge key here, kind of like some of those young defensemen, like in the Atlantic, and Philip Broberg, for example, is another guy in St. Louis who needs to take a step forward. Same could be said for Dylan Sandberg. Like, he's been in their prospect pipeline for quite a bit. And if he's projected to be in the top 4, he better prove it because, this is his time. There's opportunity there. And if he can't, cement himself as a top 4 defenseman, that does not help the Jets. It definitely hurts them, in fact. And Logan Stanley and Colin Miller, I guess it's an okay third pair, but I'm not like super happy with it either. Like, I just think that they could use a little bit more depth on the blue line, and just defensively, it's not a team that I really think is that great. But that's become the story for the Jets for quite a while now. This team lives and dies with Connor Hellebuyck. I think we all know that. It doesn't matter who the backup is unless Hellebuyck goes down with injury. Knock on wood. Sorry if that sounded too loud. But yeah, Hellebuyck is a fantastic goaltender. To assume that he's going to be a Vezina caliber guy year in and year out it's asking a lot, especially since over the course of his career, he has been known to be a little bit inconsistent. As far as 2 years ago, he was kind of just an average goalie. If he reverts back to that at least somewhat, that definitely hurts the Jets' chances of making the playoffs for sure, because I think he goes wherever the Jets go. The Jets go wherever he goes. That's the correct way of saying it. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, if he goes down, obviously that I think they're basically done, because he is the best player on the Jets, the most important player on the Jets. Kaapo Kähkönen as their backup, not sold on that. He hasn't shown any consistency at any level at the NHL for any team at any point in the NHL. So, feel like Hellebuck has to be on his game once again this season. And if he is, the Jets will be dominant. They'll probably be top 3 in the division. I think it's fairly likely that they could still end up like 3rd, maybe even 2nd again. We'll see. But look, I still have my concerns with them defensively. Goaltending, if it doesn't hold up, there's definitely reason to believe that the Jets could significantly regress. So ultimately, I still think the Jets are going to have a good season, and they're definitely going to be in the hunt for a playoff spot yet again. But for me, I still have some concerns. Like I said, I think there's a legitimate possibility that they could regress significantly. Again, to the point if they miss the playoffs, maybe that's a hot take, but I could see it happening. And unfortunately, I have them just shy of the playoffs. But also, if I did put them in over the team that I have next in 4th, ultimately making the playoffs over them, I realized that I would have the exact same 8 teams coming out of the West as as the 8 teams that made the playoffs last year. So I want to do a little bit of a change up because I think with the parity in the NHL, I just feel like it's pretty unlikely that the same exact teams are going to make it again this season. I would be shocked if that were to happen. So I wanted to pick at least one team to fall out, and I guess it just happened to be Winnipeg, especially with the Central, in my opinion, is significantly improved. It's probably easily the 2nd best division in the NHL. So that's why I got the Jets just missing. I know it's a hot take, but that's what I'm rolling with. So coming in at number 4, sneaking into that 2nd wild card in the Western Conference, I'm going with the Minnesota Wild, 43, 32, and 7 for 93 points. I got them tied with the Jets, but again, I need a hot take. I didn't want the same teams making it, so I made a slight adjustment. And I'm going to say that the Minnesota Wild are going to have a somewhat of a bounce back season and get themselves back into the playoffs in 2025. Now, I didn't put the Wild back in the playoffs just for the sake because I want to be different. I genuinely believe that the Wild have what it takes to be better than they were last season. For me, I just think they have the talent, especially up front. Very solid offensive team. Could score quite a few goals. Kirill Kaprizov obviously being the main catalyst. He's a fantastic player. In any given season, you can argue he has the capabilities of being a top 5 scorer or, at the very least, top 10 player in the NHL from year to year. And I think they just have the potential to bounce back. Looking at their roster, I definitely think there's a lot of things to like for this Wild group. Now, albeit they didn't add a ton of major additions because of the cap constraints that they currently have, I still think the roster as a whole is definitely good enough to, at the very least, be more so in the playoff conversation. I mean, they kind of were last year, 87 points, missed the playoffs by, I think they missed it by like 11 points or something, or 10 points, but still, I still think this team is good enough to, at the very least, be a lot better than they were last year. Looking at their forward group, I mean, we said Kaprizov, he's a fantastic player, easily puts up 100 points if he's healthy every season. Joel Eriksson Ek, fantastic year, had over 30 goals, or about 30 goals, over 60 points. Matt Boldy as well, 30 goal scorer in his own right. Bottom 6, I think, is really solid with Marcus Foligno, Ryan Hartman, can give you a little bit of offense there too. Frederick Gaudreau. Obviously, Matt Zuccarello is their veteran and, maybe not the player he once was, but could still provide some really solid playmaking. And then there's Marco Rossi, who is a huge X factor for this team. I mean, I would say that Joel Eriksson Ek is technically like their number 1 guy, but because Rossi's projected to be the number 1 center, there's a lot of pressure on him to take another step forward, but he's coming off a really solid rookie season. He had 20 goals, 40 points, and I think he still has that potential. I mean, being a high draft pick to, take another step forward. And if he is playing with a guy like Kirill Kaprizov, he should produce a lot more than he did in his rookie year. And I could definitely envision a world where he's putting up 50, 55, maybe even 60 points and really cement himself as, well, at the very least, a top 6 forward on that Wild team for sure. So I think the Wild are in prime position to improve their offense and just be a really solid scoring team. But defensively, I think they are significantly better than they were last season, in part because of the return of Jared Spurgeon. He is their captain, their leader. And when he was healthy, just a very solid two-way presence, one of the more underrated players in the league. And as a defenseman, on any given season, people look at him as being at the very least a top 15 defenseman in the NHL. And I think he will prove that once again this year, coming back with less pressure on him because of the emergence of Brock Faber, who I think has taken the reins as their number 1 defenseman on this Wild blue line, coming off a fantastic north of 45-point season, nearly 50 points as a rookie defenseman, which that is fantastic. A guy who's just an absolute beast, and he got locked up long-term to a fantastic contract that's going to age perfectly, in my opinion. him and Jonas Brodin is very solid. Like they're really solid, like two-way defenders. Middleton, I think, is very underrated as well. I really like the blue line on the Wild. I think it's one of the better blue lines in the division, quite frankly. And I think that's a big reason why the Wild could be a lot better than it was last year, just based on that the potential. I think it has the potential to be a lot better, especially with Spurgeon coming back. But the goaltending is going to be massive for them. And I think, like I said, with the goaltending being a volatile position and you never know how it's going to look year in and year out, the goaltending might not be good for some teams. They might like come down. Like I said, Binnington, Hellebuck, they had such great seasons. Can they replicate that? On the contrary, for Minnesota, I don't envision the goaltending being nearly as bad as it was last season. Like Fleury and Gustafsson were absolutely terrible, especially Gustafsson, who's much younger. He still has potential to be really solid. And this first full season there, he was one of the better goalies in the league. And I'm not saying he'll get back to that necessarily, but if he could at least get to like a 9-15, be average to above average, and Fleury could be solid in what looks to be his final NHL season. If the goaltending is just a little bit better, that definitely helps the Wild's chances of making the playoffs, because overall this is a really solid roster, and I think it's one of the more underrated ones in the NHL, and I think they can compete with anybody, especially in the Central Division. So yeah, I just think it's an underrated team that underachieved last year. I just think it's very solid. I think they're very complete. I just have faith in this Wild team, quite frankly, to bounce back and be better than they were last season. And, they've been a playoff team fairly consistently the last few years, with last season just being a bit of an off season, even though they were like kind of in the hunt still towards the end of the season, although they did fizzle out late, but they were not a bad team. Like 87 points are still in the playoff discussion, at least. If they can get a little bit better, like I could see them getting like 6 more points. And that could be enough for them to get the playoffs, and I think it will. I think they are a wild card team. I think they have the potential to do it. And yes, I think they're going to be fourth in that Central Division and bounce back into the Stanley Cup playoffs. Call me crazy because they didn't make any major additions in the offseason, but as the team stands internally, I think they're definitely good enough to do it. So that's my opinion. So getting into the top 3 in the Central Division, in my opinion, once again, I got the Colorado Avalanche again finishing third. 48-27-7 record for 103 points. Again, I'm not a huge fan of their offensive depth, and they definitely lost some key pieces. Like Nichushkin, I don't know when he's going to be returning in the lineup. Landeskog is still a question mark, even though he expects to start the season, or at least expects to return at some point during the season for the Avs. There is a world where I definitely think they're not quite as lethal as they have been in years past, so I am expecting a slight regression. When you have guys like Nathan MacKinnon, Mikko Rantanen, and Cale Makar leading the charge, there is no reason to question what their core can do, and I think them alone are capable of making the Avalanche a huge threat to win the Stanley Cup yet again, a huge threat at the very least in the Western Conference, and be one of the favorites to at least come out of the Western Conference. A lot of just amazing talent up front, especially with their top guys, and even some of their guys in their middle six are capable of producing in the roles that they have been. They've proven it, like Lehkonen and Casey Middlestad, who's fitting like a glove since coming in, and they still have really solid defense. So this Avs team's definitely poised to make another run at the Stanley Cup. So looking at their forward group, yes, the depth is a little bit depleted. Like we said, Nichushkin, Landeskog, if they are implemented at some point, that's going to greatly improve Colorado's chances, especially if Landeskog returns to kind of the player he was before he got hurt, although it might take some adjusting, hasn't played hockey in over 2 years, so that might be a little bit of a concern for them. But again, MacKinnon, Rantanen, Lehkonen, and Middlestat, fantastic for their top 2 lines. Drouin was an amazing story, struggling throughout his entire career in Montreal and coming in first year with Colorado, basically no pressure on him, just being a kind of a sidekick to MacKinnon, having a little bit of a Halifax connection in the QMJHL when they played together in junior. He had north of 50 points. He was fantastic for them, just a really solid contributor. Another huge question mark is Nikolai Kovalenko. He's slated to play the top 6. You don't know how good he's going to be, even though he had some solid seasons overseas. But, we don't know how good he's going to be, if he fits in really in the top 6 or if he's more of a bottom 6 guy. But we'll see how that pans out. But even the third line of Wood, Colton, and O'Connor, not the worst, especially Colton and O'Connor are just very solid, two-way guys. And Logan O'Connor is like a, penalty kill threat, one of the better penalty killers in the league. And Colton's just a very gritty, Wood kind of the same, very speedy, fast, just solid bottom 6 forwards. Fourth line to me is a concern. I don't like Parker Kelly and Chris Wagner in this lineup, but I guess ultimately when Jinchushkin and Landeskog come back, they're going to bump some guys down, and probably those two would find themselves out of the lineup. At least that's my opinion. But yeah, forward group is not the worst I've seen. It's just the depth isn't quite like maybe like a Stanley Cup championship roster. But when you have the top guys that you do, you definitely give yourself a chance every single game. And as for their defense, although maybe it's not as good as it once was, the top four at least can hang with pretty much any other top four in the NHL. Devon Toews, Cale Makar, fantastic. Gerard Manson, very decent second pair. Main concern is definitely their goaltending. I was not a huge fan when Georgiev was picked up from the Rangers to Colorado. A lot of guys were telling me that, yeah, you know what, he could be good enough to be a starter. And I still don't see it with him. He just has not been consistent at any point with the Avalanche. I mean, he's had his moments where he's looked absolutely fantastic, and then he'd have a stretch where he'd play like total dog water, to be honest with you. So you just hope that you find that consistency with him. But with the Avalanche, they're so prolific offensively. Like when Kemper was there, when they won the Cup, he wasn't amazing by any means, but he was good when he had to be. So as long as Georgiev is good when he has to be, and he had his moments in the playoffs where he was solid. So you just hope for his sake, if he can be a little bit better, that will help the Avs' chances. But the goaltending still is a concern. But again, the team in front of him, more than good enough for the goaltending to we can kind of get by with it being at par or subpar even, because the team in front of him is just so talented up front. Overall, although I don't think they're quite what they were last season or even a couple of seasons ago, this is still a team that in any given season should contend for a Stanley Cup. And look, they're not going to dominate the regular season necessarily. I mean, I have them 103 points. They'll be a really solid team, a really great team. But there's two teams in the division that I think are a little bit better overall and more complete. And that's why I have the Avs in third, but the Avs are still going to be in for a really good season in that Central Division and should still be contending for another Stanley Cup for several years down the road. So second in the Central Division, a team that I think is going to take quite a bit of a leap this season, given how amazing their offseason was. I got the Nashville Predators 49, 27, and 6, basically the same as Colorado, but I ultimately put them in second, 104 points. I just think that they're significantly better than they were last season. I thought, honestly, last year they kind of overachieved, and if it wasn't for their offseason, I was probably going to pick them to regress, but given the moves that they made, I cannot argue them not being a playoff team, and in fact, I think they're going to be one of the more dominant teams in the NHL this year. I mean, just the fact that they added Brady Shea, who was an amazing top four defenseman coming off a great season, and Jonathan Marchessault and Steven Stamkos. Stamkos, obviously a perennial 40-goal scorer, and Jonathan Marchessault, who's coming off a great career high in 42 goals. You add especially two 40-goal scorers to your lineup, there's absolutely no excuse, considering that this team was already very solid offensively with Forsberg and Yossi and Nyquist and Ryan O'Reilly and Luke Evangelista too, a really respectable rookie season. No excuse for this team to not be anywhere close from a playoff spot, especially with the great defense they have and with the amazing goaltending they have as well. This team should definitely be in line to, I mean, they're definitely a lock in my opinion, just given that the roster that they have, there's no excuse for them to not make the playoffs, but you could definitely make the argument that they are a legitimate Stanley Cup contender now. I mean, the forward group, I don't really have to say anything. Marchessault and Stamkos significantly improves them. Tommy Novak centering that second line is definitely going to, up his production, playing with two guys who can score 40 goals. I mean, at least it projects to up his value and up his production, but we'll see if he is truly that second line center. I think he is, but if he projects to play with those two wingers, he's going to definitely pop off a little bit. Top line, I wouldn't touch. O'Reilly's a solid number one center. Forsberg had an amazing season. I think it was the best season of his career, actually. I think he had like over 90 points and like north of 40 goals as well, maybe flirty with 50 even. Like, just incredible production. Gustav Nyquist had a career season as well, had over 70 points. And, being a guy who's in his mid-30s now, you wonder if he can replicate that. But the top six looks absolutely loaded for sure. And Evangelista is a guy who could take a step forward too. Just fantastic forward group here. And even looking at the team defensively, like, it's not much different than it was from last season. I mean, their only really change here is adding in Brady Shea. And, in turn, they trade away Ryan McDonough back to Tampa Bay, right? So, and I mean, this defense was solid enough to help get the Predators into the playoffs. So I can't imagine why it wouldn't be solid for them again. I like a lot of their players. I think Luke Schenn is a very steady presence on a third pair. Alexander Carrier, I still think, is a very good defenseman. Lauzon's kind of broken out somewhat since coming over from the Boston Bruins. He's definitely, taken on a bigger role, and he's done a fairly good job, in my opinion. And obviously, Roman Josi is, he's one of the top defensemen in the league. You can argue he is. Well, I guess I wouldn't take him over Cale Makar, but you can argue he's at best the second best defenseman. At worst, he's probably top 5 in the league. But anyway, the defense is solid as well. And then, of course, their goaltending is fantastic with UC Saros leading the way. They locked him up long term. They know where their direction is. They're not a team that's retooling, looking to rebuild. They're going all in by adding those goal scorers, trading away Askarov because they know that UC Saros is their guy. They wanted to lock him up, and he's their starter. So they're going to roll with the team that they have. They're definitely in a prime position to be one of the few contenders in the Western Conference for a few years to come at least. They have Scott Wedgwood backing him up, I think, is a fantastic backup. So the team just looks really solid on paper, and they're looking to make waves this season, that's for sure. So yeah, again, all the pieces are there for this team to be in a position to contend for a Stanley Cup. Wouldn't surprise me if they are the team that indeed does come out of the Western Conference, just given what they added. Like I said, I'm going to say it again, there is no excuse for this team not to make the playoffs now. They put themselves on the map, a team that was very underrated. Not a lot of people were sure, what direction this team was going in. We now know that they want to compete for a Stanley Cup for the next 3 to 5 years. They put themselves on the map. All eyes are on this Predators team. There's a ton of pressure on this team entering this season, and they got to prove that they're a legit Stanley Cup contender, but I think they have what it takes. And, a big start from that is them being a dominant team in the regular season, being north of 100 points. That's a big reason why they're going to finish second in this division, in my opinion, because I think they have the potential. And with that, first in the Central, same as last season, I got the Dallas Stars, 53-20-9 for 115 points. Basically about the same team as they were last season, and I believe that they are going to win the President's Trophy. To me, this is just the most complete team in the NHL, in my opinion. I mean, I don't really need to explain anything with the Stars. Everyone knows that this team is an elite team, and it's going to be in contention for a Stanley Cup. I mean, back-to-back Western Conference Finals appearances. This past season, losing to the Edmonton Oilers in 6. The year before, lost to the Vegas Golden Knights in 6 games as well. This team has been knocking on the door the last couple of seasons, but this team has the makeup to win a Stanley Cup. Starting with their forward group, this is by far the deepest forward group in the entire NHL. They proved it last season. I think they had, what was it, like 8 20 goal scorers or 9 20 goal scorers. Just incredible production from this lineup up from top down. Jason Robertson, although coming off a down season, he's still a point per game player. It would not surprise me if he gets back to the very least 90 points. If he hits over 100, I wouldn't be overly surprised. Rope Hintz is another guy that maybe disappointed slightly, but he's still a top two-way number 1 center in my opinion. And Wyatt Johnston, I think, is just getting better, looking like an absolute steal. And I think he's going to take yet another step forward. I have him leading the league in goal, leading the team in goals. I think he has that potential to be a 40-goal scorer. And I think he will hit 40 as soon as next season. But just the overall versatility of this lineup, there's a lot of guys on the wing that you could put at center. Like Wyatt Johnston is easily capable of playing center. I mean, he was drafted as one, but just because of how great they are down the middle, they don't really need to implement them there. But Tyler Seguin obviously is a center as well. You could put him there. Even Jamie Benn at stretches has played center. So you have a ton of options with this lineup. Doesn't really matter to me what the combinations are as long as their chemistry is there. This team is going to score a ton of goals and be one of the more prolific, deepest offensive teams in the league once again. And then another, factor there, Logan Stankoven, who had a really solid run. Technically, it's going to be his rookie season. I think he'll be in the conversation for the Calder Trophy for sure because I envision him being a 50-plus point guy as soon as next season. Maverick Bourque is another guy who, if he is projected to be in the top 9, he was very fantastic in the AHL. So if he, takes that next step and becomes an NHL forward and is very decent productivity-wise, like this is going to be a really solid team. Again, forward line 1 to forward line 4, just solid all around. Definitely the best forward group in the NHL, in my opinion. Now, this is something I never have said about the Dallas Stars over the last few years, but I guess my one major concern for them is their defense, especially their defensive depth. Look, I like Thomas Harley, had a breakout season. I think he is top pair caliber. Miro Heiskan's obviously one of the best defensemen in the league. Lindell's a solid top 4 guy, but that right side, I'm not a huge fan of. I think they definitely downgraded defensively, losing, Yanni Hakanpää and Chris Tanev more notably as well. If Miro Heiskanen goes down, like I don't know if the right side can handle Ilya Labushkin and Matt Dumba playing consistent top 4 minutes. Like to me, that's kind of scary because neither of these guys are needle movers necessarily, especially Matt Dumba, who's much older and is coming off probably the worst season of his career. Just didn't look like he was an NHL caliber defenseman anymore, to be honest. And Ilya Labushkin is just more of an energy guy that could be very physical. And I think on a Stanley Cup contending team, he's probably best suited as a third pair, maybe even a seventh D man. So I am a little bit concerned about the defense, just their depth overall. But again, I still think up top on their blue line, it's good enough. They'll be eating a lot of minutes, obviously, but if they're healthy, I think they'll be good enough to stabilize it. And I mean, the Stars have always wildly been considered like a great defensively structured team, so maybe that will be fine, especially with the offense that they have. I think they'll do just fine, and especially Jake Ottinger, who I don't think is going to be as bad as he was last season. He may not be as elite as people claim, but he's still, for me, one of the better starters in the NHL. And like, despite him having a subpar season, the Stars were still like the second best team in the NHL. And if he is just slightly better, if he can be a 910, 915 save percentage guy and just give them, at least more consistent, just solid, high quality goaltending, the Stars can easily run away with the President's Trophy and be in line to be the favorite to win the Stanley Cup. That wouldn't surprise me whatsoever. And I especially like the addition of Casey DeSmith, very solid backup. They got a really solid tandem there. And overall, this team has all the makings to be one of the best teams in the NHL this season for sure. So for the Stars, it just comes down to how amazing their forward group is. Defensively, at least up top, amazing. And especially if Ottinger bounces back, I think it's unlikely that he's worse or as bad as he was last season. So I think the Stars are definitely in prime position to be one of the best teams in the league. And as a result, I just think they're the most complete team in the NHL. And it was an easy pick for me to pick them as the President's Trophy winning team in the NHL, and definitely the potential to win a Stanley Cup there in Dallas. So with that is going to wrap up this video for my Central Division standings predictions for the upcoming NHL 2024-2025 season. Bit of a tougher division to predict. I know there's going to be some hot takes here. Some guys are not going to be happy with the rankings, but it is what it is. You're welcome to let your frustrations known in the comments section. I'm okay with it. I'm okay with interacting and having some debates. It's not a problem for me. Let me know your thoughts. Don't be shy. Agree or disagree, let me know in the comments. Give me some of your predictions. Give me, what your standings look like in the Central Division. So once again, gonna wrap up this video. Be sure to leave a like on this one if you enjoyed, and subscribe to the channel if you are ever so kind. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll talk to you in the next one. See ya.